So I will call to order a meeting of Wenham Finance and Advisory Committee on Wednesday, January 24th at 6:31 p.m. Present are Jeff Calder,
Finn Sprague.
Scott Schoenberger.
all right, thank you. And joining us this evening, as you can see, we have Chief Kavanaugh and Deputy Chief Baxter from the Fire Department and Chief DiNapoli from the Police Department. I don't know if any of you gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I don't know if any gentlemen are time pressed, and
Nope.
that would determine whether we speak about the Fire Department or the
Only if a call comes in.
Okay. And then I guess what we can kick off then with fire, if that's okay.
Yeah.
We did have a few questions sent in advance of the call tonight, so I thought I would just read those quickly to get them into the public record.
Yep.
And then we can proceed from there. So two questions directed to the fire department. One relates to the grant request last year. So why did the grant request last year for communications equipment in the amount of $209,000 fail when neighboring towns received grant funding? What are the lessons learned to be successful in the future? So that was one question. And then second was, what is the average value of ambulance calls annually that are passed by Wenham to private ambulance services or neighboring towns? And I suppose the rest of that question was due to the fact that Wenham has a single ambulance.
Yes.
And then for police, first question was, the purchase of new pistols is described as saving money over time. How many years to break even? And how does this compare to the practical useful life of 9mm caliber Glocks? The next question was, have the weapons been discharged by officers and when in the line of duty, or is this about weapons training? Next, the 3-year replacement cycle for police vehicles has been in place, we're told, for roughly 15 years, but the department changed from purchasing Dodge vehicles from Ford because they're more reliable. Has this replacement cycle been revisited since the switch to Dodge Durangos? Has the possible has the possible incremental repair cost per vehicle been weighed against the $20,000 in sunk cost per vehicle every 3 years to equip and mark new patrol vehicles? And next, shifts run from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m., 3 p.m. to 11, and 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Question, how does the workload or incidents per officer compare by shift? And lastly, for what tasks is overtime approved? And is the town compensated for police that are detailed to traffic control at private construction or road projects? So just wanted to get those into the public record. Those were sent to the chiefs in advance of the call this evening. So with that, I will ask Chief Kavanaugh if you would like to make an opening comment or a statement in advance, or
Sure.
if you want to just jump into questions.
Nope. On question number one.
And Dano, thank you for Dano Jaconowicz just joined us. Thank you.
The grant application was for 5 communities for the communications equipment. That was for Wenham, Topsfield, Essex, Manchester by the Sea, and Middleton. All the communities had the same need to update the old equipment, portables and base radios, so we could just communicate during mutual aid, either through fire response or medical response. Unfortunately, the federal grant committee turned it down. I don't know why they didn't think there was a need for it, but with that's why we jumped on board with the other 4 communities, because we figured it would be a greater need for all 5 communities to get on board at the same time. So,
Well, sure. Yeah, particularly, I suppose, if you provide mutual aid to one another,
Yeah,
you need to be able
absolutely.
to talk to one another. Well,
but there's so many
on-
federal grants that they hit these smaller towns like out west and stuff, and they get a lot of the funding, and unfortunately. But the lesson learned from that would be focus more on just Wenham at that point. And for
So
we
they
did
haven't
receive.
given you any specific feedback as to why the communities have failed. 'Cause
Well,
we've heard
well,
contrary
no, I
to
have a
that.
feeling. I have a feeling I know what happened, because
Okay.
they got a grant back in, I believe, 20 or 21, with 4 or 5 other communities, almost the same communities, but not Wenham. And they only got partial radios. So they were trying to finish up, I think, that grant to finish up the amount they needed. And of course, they denied it. So everyone's running on just bare necessities, and it's unfortunate that they should have approved it. And we did receive 3 grants last year. One was for student awareness, the SAFE grant, for $2,881, so we can teach in the schools. And we got another senior SAFE grant for $1,777, where we can, go to Enon Village and present fire safety. We also got a grant from the Department of Fire Services Firefighter Safety Equipment Grant in the amount of $10,646.25. And that would have actually been added on this year for fire gear, which would have brought that up to probably 45,000, but we're only asking 35, because we got 3 sets of gear with that money, which we're in dire need of. So.
Is this a continuing grant program?
Yep, we try and do it
You
every
apply
year.
every year in
Yeah,
theory.
we try and do it every year for those 3 grants either way, and then we try and do a federal grant. Like, we've got the brush truck through a federal grant. We've got the air trailer through a federal grant.
Yeah.
We're gonna try and write a federal grant this year, because for our SCBA fill station, which is 150,000, but we might put in for 200,000, because everything goes up. So that's on our 5-year capital plan, I believe, for FY29, or I can look it up quick. But it's in our 5-year plan either way, and that would be a nice hit to take out of there, 150,000 to 200,000.
Sure.
So.
And so if this is a federal program that assists with the purchase of communications equipment, and it is every year, in theory, then you could apply next year, but you're telling us that to go another 12 months is a problem.
Yeah, it's not working, because we just went. I hate to say it, but we never go to Rockport, and of course we were there last weekend, and we couldn't talk to anyone. So, and of course Manchester was there, they couldn't talk to anyone, and it's brutal. You try and get one of their handheld portables, and that's what you use. So, if you can find one.
Yeah.
But other than that, everything has to be radioed back to regional dispatch and then back to us again.
Right.
It's all time that we shouldn't be missing on, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess it's not hyperbole to
No.
say it can be life and death.
Yeah.
Okay, any follow-up questions from other members of the committee on that? I know it was an area of particular interest because it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Okay,
Question 2.
sure.
All right, so we figured the calls that are passed to private ambulance companies annually would amount to approximately 25 to 35 calls with an average loss revenue of 25,000 to 40,000. And if our ambulance is tied up on a response in Wenham, any mutual aid call would also consist of a loss. And that loss would be, you'd be looking at probably another, well, it's hard to say because we never know when we're going to go mutual aid. So, but it would be a loss. So,
Sure. But what
and
is
even
easier to
when our
calculate?
ambulance is down for maintenance or repairs, that's also a loss. But we've also been fortunate where if we know it's going to be down for a week or 2 weeks, Atlantic Ambulance has actually offered us to borrow one of theirs. And it's really nice. We have a good working relationship with them. And it's actually nice to have them. And we also have in the 5-year capital plan for FY27, we're looking to replace that ambulance. And that would put the current ambulance into reserve status, which would give us the second ambulance. And that would be good for mutual aid, and we wouldn't have to ask for mutual aid or the private ambulance as often.
Where would you keep the reserve ambulance at that point? I think you've talked about having another spot over near, was it Iron Rail?
Yep, we figured where they keep their signs over where Mike Curdy's office is to the right bay. All we would need to do is build a wall with a door in it, secure, because we have drugs on the ambulance, so we have to keep it secure. And we also have to have it heated. So basically, it would be a cost of building the wall and putting a Modine heater in. They can keep their signs in there. All we got to do is just be able to back it in. That's it. It's a simple fix. So.
And you think that's 2027, you said?
Yes.
And Jeff Soulard, you've got that ambulance purchase or somehow in your long-term capital plan?
Yeah, that's in the 5-year projection.
Yeah.
And then remind us, Chief, what is the current age of the existing ambulance and
It's
what's the useful life
2017.
of them?
To
2017.
2017. So after usually 5 years, 5 to 10 years, you try and put it into reserve. You try and stress for 5 years, because that's one thing you don't want is something to happen to it when there's a patient in the back of it.
Sure.
So that's it's very important to have a really, really good ambulance that you can rely on.
Okay, thank you.
But we also hate to see the money lost when we have to call. We have a motor vehicle accident with 2 injured people. We can only transport 1 when we could transport 2.
Sure.
So don't worry, we're on it.
Yeah, well,
we're always thinking ahead. So
yeah, you shared how you acquired the first one, so
yeah,
you guys you're clever there. Maybe shifting to any follow-up questions from any other members of the committee about kind of where we're at with the existing ambulance and this projection to try to supplement. Okay. Maybe shifting to the operating budget. Any follow-up questions from the committee with respect to the wages or general expenses?
everything was pretty much level funded. So, and we had that one time 53,000 deducted for the 15 portable radios. So
I know one thing that kind of jumped out, and Jeff Soulard and I were emailing back and forth a little bit, was the gap between proposed gas and electric spending in actual gas and electric spending. This may be more a question for accounting than you, Chief, but it does kind of jump out when you lay the numbers out side to side and you put what the FY24 and 5 requests are, compared to actual spend. But I think
Yeah, so with ours, we actually put it,
identified that.
they wanted us to put it high because we didn't, it was an unknown on what they were going to be charging us because as everyone knows, the bills went up. And for us, we're a different animal because when those two big doors open out front, we lose all our heat. And then we have to everything pumps back on again, and it takes a while to get the heat back up.
Sure.
So
I think there was anxiety last year. While COVID was still
Yeah.
more of an issue, the National Grid as a supplier
Yeah.
spoke about the increases that they were going to charge. That I think makes sense in FY24, but we have the experience now. The level of funding might be jumping off an inflated figure based on actual spend.
Yeah.
And Jeff, just to piggyback on that, Steve and I were talking today because I believe there was actually in last year's budget something like sort of a reserve fund for utility last year that was put under the control of the Board of Selectmen. So Steve and I are actually going to try to do a deep dive on that in the next week or two to sort of see, like, I don't think we've really tapped it much at all. So it could be that that was good planning on the part of the town, but maybe we didn't need that. So that's another another revenue source that maybe that's going to roll the free cash because we don't end up experiencing as bad a utility increase as we were hoping. But yeah, your point here on the fire, maybe we could tamp those down a little bit. You might be able to save maybe $10,000 across the two line items there. I do expect we haven't spent much in the way of gas at the fire station right now, but I would assume that the next few months will catch that right up, get us more towards, I'm assuming, something in the $9,000 range by the time we're all said and done.
So even if you put it down to 15 each one,
which
to be on the safe side.
Yeah, I think some movement would be helpful. I think we all recognize the importance of having free cash and where free cash comes from, budgeting monies that don't get spent. But I think there's kind of an increasing concern in the populace here of the amount of role and suggestion that maybe some of that needs to be given back if we're overtaxing. So there's a balance there, right? I don't want to encourage that kind of.
So Jeff Soulard, I'm looking at some of the materials that you sent over, the public safety budget PDF. I'm looking at the second at the third slide, right, which is where we are.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to make sure that I understood the projected FY24 column, right? This, whether or not you would, that's a number that you're ready to stand by. I'm just looking at, pretty reduced wages number compared to the 2024 budget.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, like in most cases, that number is, we're halfway through the year. In most cases, that number is a ×2 number. It's not anything like, if I were to put myself back in Essex where I had 10 years of experience with a budget, I was much more proficient at saying like, oh, I kind of know where this one will end up or where that one will. Here, I don't know that as much. So I think I tried to put in the email, like, it's mainly just a guide just so that you can look and say, maybe ask a further question sort of thing. But yeah, I mean, typically wages, I can tell you the way we handle the budgeting of wages here is a little different. So it's tougher to, like, I know the chief's salary is going to end up at the budget number because that's what he's going to make. So if there's a question of, maybe stipends get paid at the end or things like that. Like typically, if you look through, the chief, the deputy chief, they should be right on budget. It's more the ones that are, the call firefighters and things like that. So no, I don't think I'd ever hang my hat on these things are 100% accurate. They were mainly meant to be a tool of, maybe to prompt a question somewhere. And sometimes the question would just be like, in the case of something like gas, you'd say, well, obviously, gas is not going to end up at $1,100. It's good. We're going to experience something different in the winter. But yeah, I would assume, I mean, honestly, like if I were to guess, I think the projected is showing at, 608 for wages, just on a bit, ×2 sort of thing. It might be that, it's plus or minus 10,000 depending on, how many calls they have, that type of thing. So yeah, not anything I would, put 100% stock in.
Okay, so that's how you came up with this, is you took the FY24 number and basically multiplied by 2 for most of these numbers here in the next.
Yeah, I was gonna pull it up right now just to double check it, but I may have actually in that one trying to work it a little bit to sort of come up with what it might actually be. Just pull this one up here. I can tell you.
Is it fair to say, though, Chief, that the figure is somewhat speculative and it's based on the volume of calls that you have to go on, because most of your team are call officers?
Oh yeah, you never know what you're gonna have, and you never know who's gonna show up. So that's the problem, though.
But if they're not salaried, also it's variable based on how many calls you get.
Yes.
Our past history also shows that we only end up with somewhere around 8,000 left a year.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty tight on wages, Jeff.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Finn, I did confirm that particular line item is just a ×2. I'm just thinking there's other things in there. There's, I'm not as aware of when fire does training, or I mean that can be a big a big increase in salary numbers, wage numbers coming through our system at various times in the year. Yeah, I mean, like that number projects fairly low. I would assume, it's going to come in, probably higher than that when all things are said and done. If Jeff and Baxter is saying, typically we come in about, 8,000 or so within the budget, then, that would indicate there's, actually that raises a question. I know, Jeff or Steve, in Essex, call firefighters get paid for a good chunk of their, time almost quarterly rather than every week. The call firefighters, I don't know if it's similar here.
Monthly.
They get paid monthly. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that would make it a little more even probably than in Essex. The big quarterly payments can like this year the second quarter payment was late, so as of December 31st it looked way off, and then in January they made that second payment, and it kind of brought things back to square.
38 years ago I got paid quarterly.
Any additional thoughts, questions from the finance committee for Steve or Jeff or our fire department?
Well, I'm still not sure I understand, mates, for Jeff, where we land process wise. So right now you're projecting 2 times. Where do we go from here? Like you said, the salaries are gonna be what they're gonna be, but the other pieces we'll just refine as we get more data coming in the coming months, and then we'll refine the budget request to align with that.
Yeah, we do, every month we do, budget to date actual reports, and, continue to hone in on that. This is through December 31st. We're almost to the end of January. So we'll have those new reports, in the next couple of, week or so. Yeah, and you can continue to refine it. I mean, to some degree, you're relying on the expertise of your department heads here to, say, and maybe they can provide a deeper explanation. If we were to say, look, if we take your wages paid through 12/31 and we double them, we come up to 608. What's going to get us from 608 to 700? And they might be able to lay out for you, well, there's a big training in March, there's this, and then as they said, a lot of it is just flat out variable in terms of the calls and the frequency of those.
And we also had to
But
play
we're
catch
getting
up
we're
with the
getting to
union.
just clarifying, we're getting you, sorry, Chief, but Jeff,
no.
just clarifying what you said. It's how we get from 608 to 754, right?
Yeah, true. Well, 754 is next year's budget. I was looking more at the, like say the 719 for this year, because we're tracking to, as of December 31st, we're tracking to 608 out of a 719 or 720 budget. The increase next year is largely just like either contract or COLA driven. So it's really kind of the same projected activity. It's just paid at a higher rate.
Well, that's my question. Yeah, if we ended the year at 608, then it's a 24% increase to get to 754, right? Based on your columns. So
Yeah.
Is 24% COLA related? And
no, it wouldn't be that way. But when you're looking at it that way, it would be the 754 is more like contractual plus 2% COLA for based on the 719, the 24 adopted column.
Well, they also didn't settle their contract for 2 years. So you're on their third year of contract next year, and they're going to start all over again with another 3-year contract, and hopefully it gets settled quick because we had to play catch up for those other years. That's what I think you're seeing as a big increase, especially on the call side.
But Dano, to your point, I would say, let's take a look at the 131 numbers, see, sort of how that projects, how does that shift the projection, so instead of being times 2, now it's, divide by 7 times 12, see where that, lands. And then, certainly I can talk to Jeff or Steve, or, we can reach out to them to sort of say, look, here's what we're trying to see. If I extrapolate out where we're at and I try to figure out how we're getting to that number, what is it we think is going to happen? And, they can either tell you whether it's training or, the spring is busier for whatever reason, or that type of thing. And then, I can work with Steve to try to give you more breakdown on what are the contractual reasons we're going from a 719 or a 720 budget to a 754 budget, which is actually laid out in the slide for fire that's out on the shared drive there.
Yeah, to me, that's I get that's a 5% increase. That's probably COLA and or contract or whatever. It's the 24% I'm having trouble getting my head around. It makes me assume that either we're filling an empty position, or we're going to have a bunch more calls, or something drastically happens between our current run rate and our projected budget.
Yeah.
But
no, I get what you. I mean, it's one of the reasons we built this out that way, is so you can sort of say, wait a minute, I'm just trying to figure out how we get from A to B, and raise the question. So, I think, again, if you look at 131, we'll see if that gap closes at all. And if not, then we have to maybe poke at it a little bit more and say, why are we tracking, not tracking anywhere near the 719. So therefore is 754, too high. Right now we're tracking at something similar to what the actual expenses were in FY23, which, as the chief points out, is everything's at a lower rate back then. So all things being equal, you would assume we're going to spend more than 616 in FY24 just based on typical or similar, run rate and, higher salaries pretty much across the board.
And is that what you mean, Chief, when you say, I mean, I get 3-year contract and contract comes up but I don't totally get the nuances of the timing of it, but are you saying the 2025 fiscal year 2025 request
Yeah, so
is
they
gonna
were,
reflect
they-
more
because of the transitions of the town administrators, the contracts never got settled. So in the bitter end, they had to settle their contract over basically 3 years. So they had to figure out what they were going to give them over those last 3 years. And that's what I think your difference, a big part of your difference is, because that includes training,
Call wages,
call wages,
stipends for
Yeah,
lieutenant.
additional
They-
EMS coverage.
just to,
There's a whole, this
There's a whole
FY
bunch of
20,
stuff.
the FY 25 contract is taking care of the past 3 years of
Yes.
the contract with the call firefighters.
Does that mean, is another way of saying that 3 years worth of costs are getting reflected in 1 year?
Correct.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes, because of the timing of last year's budget and everything else. Last year's budget did not have the ability to catch up. And obviously we were out of the prior year's budget before that. So the 25 budget, FY 25 budget is getting hit with all 3 years of this contract.
And just to review again, the contract period under which these figures were negotiated is
Yeah.
FY what to what?
22, 23, no. 23, 24, and 25.
all catching up this in 25.
Yes.
So we're talking about the budget for FY 25, which
It's
is the
carrying,
end of
the-
this contract that has just been signed. So a new
Correct.
contract will run from FY 26 to 29 or 30, depending on how many years it's
Correct.
negotiated. Yeah.
Just to quantify sort of like when we talk about these contracts, and if I'm hearing you right, Jeff Baxter, what we're essentially doing is we're paying, the increases that should have been in 23 and 24, you're paying 23, 24, and 25 all in FY 25 due to the timing of the contract. And
Absolutely correct.
if I look at that, if I look at just the call firefighters and I look at their EMT stipends and various stipends and other things, just those increases alone are basically $38,000 for FY 25. Most other things are just coming in at, say the 2% COLA. But those, the EMT stipends are up, 31%. The all call officers are up about, it looks like about 75%. And then there's 8% bumps for, firefighter half certification or additional
1,
EMS,
2.
coverage or on-call wages, those type of things. So if we look at just budget to budget, not the projected Dano, but just budget to budget, going from 720 to 754, the just regular, couple of percent COLA makes up about 8,000, and the remainder, then another 38,000 is that works out to sort of these catch-up contract changes that we're talking about, to get to a total, of about $46,000 or so.
So then it's still just getting from the 608 to the 719 though. That's
Yeah,
left
and
unexplained, which we'll figure out and wait till January and see how the numbers change.
yeah, but I think, that's part of the reason that you throw that in there is to at least start that conversation of, geez, we're tracking here. How do we get from here to here? And sometimes, like I say, sometimes if I've been here long enough, I know some of those things like, oh, don't forget, say for police, like, geez, they pay out their clothing allowance and their weapons pay and something else in June. That's going to be, 20 grand. That's going to hit right at the end of the year. I don't know, I don't know those same type of things for the fire here.
Or what you just said, that is correct with this new
Yeah.
contract, right, Stephen? It's all,
Yes.
everything's being paid in June.
Okay. But will they actually, so will they be getting some of that in this June, or is it all going to be next June, all backloaded in FY25?
Well, you're gonna have, we're gonna have to pay this June and next June,
Okay.
so things went up, like clothing allowances and
Yeah.
different things like that, like you said, also the EMT and.
Yeah. So even something like that, I mean, I know like with police in Essex, it would work that way. So even, Dano, in this example, like we're maybe tracking to 608, you might be looking at, well, there's $25,000 worth of stipends that are going to hit. So that right there is going to bring it from 608 to 633 or something like that. To get you closer to that 720 budget for FY24. But yeah, I'm happy to stay on top of this and look at it again and run it again at 131. And then, I can certainly run it, this is a fairly new thing. We haven't done this in Wenham before, but I can certainly run it by, the chief and the deputy, to say, look, here's where we're tracking, help me get from point A to point B. What are the things I'm missing, to show how we're going to sort of get there, get to the higher number. And then there's probably some amount of wiggle room in there that is just, variance in the actual volume of calls. If you have less calls, obviously you run less guys out there to respond. But yeah, I think, this is creating a dialogue that's helpful in trying to, tweak the budget, to a more normalized, number moving forward.
Just let us know when you want to meet.
Yeah, I think this would be great color to understand and have available to describe even within the warrant book to some degree, if it makes sense to try to work it in there. Because I was looking it up earlier today that for the folks in town that are on a fixed income, the Social Security increase in 2024 is 3.2%. So, how do you tell folks like that are seeing their income go up by just over 3%, that we're seeing 15 and 20% increases within the budget, and they're going to say it's just not sustainable. It's not, it doesn't make sense unless there's a good explanation and it's catch up and it's in multiple years. But I think that's color that is going to be very important to have available to describe to folks what's going on.
And I think it's important that they know the revenue that is brought in through the fire department too, which is pretty substantial, which goes into the general fund.
Or not.
Yes. Yep. Good point.
Any other questions?
Okay. Well, I think we're good.
Thank you for having us.
Steve, Jeff, thank you for joining us this evening. Appreciate
Thanks,
the
guys.
discussion.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome to stay or move on. I heard radio chatter there, so somebody's radio is squawking.
Well, any other questions, office door is always open, so
Great. Appreciate
feel free
that.
to come in.
Thank you.
You're
Have a good
welcome. Thank you for having us.
night. Chief Denockley, I think maybe some of the discussion, certainly around wage and contract, is the same issue, or maybe the same observations can be made for the police. Is that fair? You also negotiated or signed a contract which backdates to 22.
We-
And some of those stipends and allowances and accreditations, are they more heavily impacting this year than?
No, as far as the stipends, there was one additional stipend, I believe, with this new CBA agreement, that it only affected, I believe, two of our officers. It was a field training stipend, and that's $1,500 per officer annually, so minimal costs there. The rest of the additional costs associated with the agreed upon CBA was the COLA, and there was it affected retro based on the fact that they went without for over a year during negotiations, and there was some, without getting too deep into the weeds of the backstory, there was a wage scale adjustment in place for going back deep into the history of the pay within the police department. So that all being said, everyone was made whole. It was brought together, and moving forward, the contractual raises that were agreed upon are ready to go. The only difference, and I guess the tough part, is they're going to go back to the drawing board pretty quickly. They're going to start renegotiating again, quicker than we would like to, just because they went so long without. That we'll be back at it pretty fast.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe the same question applies then. If you are sitting in front of those seniors on fixed income that are seeing their wage, essentially their income, go up by just over 3% a year, what is what's the rationalization for some of the increases that we're seeing year over year within the police ranks?
They've been minimal in scale relative to the landscape that exists out there with other police officers. Wenham is where they should be, specific to the times that we're in. We are very proud of the education that most of our officers have. All of our full-time officers, I believe, at this point have a minimum bachelor's degree. Most of them, a good portion of them, have a master's degree. We're an accredited agency through the Mass Police Accreditation Commission, which I'm super proud of the fact that we had another very successful accreditation on site in October. Deputy Chief Ucantoni did a phenomenal job navigating through a lot of those requirements. So our standards of excellence relative to the training that's required, the policies in place, the post commission, which is the governing body of police in Massachusetts, requirements that are very, very specific and narrowly defined relative to doing the right things in all facets of policing, if you will. We checked all those boxes. And so I would confidently stand up at any venue and speak to the quality of the officers that we have, to the professionalism that exists. Our complaints, knock on wood, are minimal to none relative to the officers' interaction with the motoring public or their interaction at calls for service. It's positive feedback, and that's the expectations that we have. And I think it's a hiring thing, it's a background thing, and I think I'm really proud of how we address that. We'd rather, right now we're down 2 officers, we're down 2 full-time slots, and myself and the deputy have always been adamant about the fact that I would rather have to sit in front of you folks and the select board members and explain why my overtime budget is overspent than to sit in front of the citizens and explain why we settled and hired an officer that otherwise shouldn't have been a police officer, because to fill that vacancy. So that's my long-winded explanation for that.
Thank you. So how do you think, if you think about pay in quartiles, where is Wenham targeting in relation to other communities, and where is it now? Are we top pay quartile? Are we mid-range? Kind of, and how do you get to that data? How do you know that?
Well, we did a lot during the negotiations. TA Poulos was heavily involved with the research that was done specific to similar size agency with similar populations, similar calls for service, similar land as far as square mileage in the municipalities. And we, to the best of our ability, we tried to come with an apples to apples comparison. And we're right where, if I were to guess, and if you were to hold my feet to the fire relative to a percentile where we're at, we're probably maybe 70th, 75th percentile. There's a good percentage that are higher, and there's some that are lower too, where I think comfortably, confidently where we should be.
Just to add context to that, generally speaking, the policy, the personnel board is targeting we've got a core group of comparable communities that were selected with the help of a consultant across the board from Wenham, and the target is to be in the 75th percentile, for that. So if I go for a new contract, in 3 years, they're going to look at that, look at finance directors across our comparable group. And, if I ask for something that's, above the 75th percentile, in theory, the personnel rules are going to say, this is our cap. We've said that, we're targeting the 75th percentile, where we can't pay you in the 105th. So that's generally speaking. So if the chief is saying we're, falling in that 70 to 75% range, that's sort of by design. And if that's something that the FinCom wants to, sort of address in a more general way, it is probably worth a discussion with the Board of Selectmen, who typically act as the personnel board, to say, how do we, to Jeff Calder's point earlier, how do we say to somebody getting a 3.1% COLA from Social Security, that we're targeting 75 instead of 50th percentile. But generally speaking, what the chief is saying is sort of in line with the policies as they exist now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Maybe we'll hold the questions more related to capital requests for the latter part of the discussion. Maybe focus at this point more so on the operating, and some of the questions that were submitted in advance, I think maybe are trying to get to the question, Chief, of what is right-sized for the police department. You said you're currently operating with 2 open officer positions. You had provided some data, and I shared it with the group about the volume of incidents by shift, and there's clearly a quieter time by a large stretch. And how do you staff then compared to how you staff in the day? What does a typical shift look like, and how do you know you have the right number of people, and do you really need those 2 extra officers? Maybe is a question to ask if you're operating without them today. And we see it in the school system. They operate without the teachers, and eventually, or other positions, they just retire them because they've learned that they can do more with less.
Right.
That's what corporations are always looking to try to accomplish.
To shed light specific to the preliminary numbers that I provided, those were only reportable incidents. So what I mean by that is the calls for service, most of the calls for service that our officers go to, they don't have to do either an offense report, an arrest report, or an accident report. Most of them they can clear with a just a calls for service as far as rendering service, and then they can clear the call and provide the necessary service that needed to be done. So that's probably, we're having a difficult time. It was freezing up on us to run it as calls. So all I was able to do was run it for reportable items. That being said, motor vehicle stops, which weren't a part of that, but I do have that data, and the other regular calls would mirror and be congruent with the data that I provided. And what I mean by that is the 3 to 11 shift, the evening shift in any municipality is the busiest shift, followed by the day shift, and then certainly midnight shift in any municipality is going to be the quieter, if you will. So that's accurate. Relative to the minimum staffing that's required, part of the union's collective bargaining agreement, it is actually contractually obligated that they be at 2 officers minimum for every shift. They cannot be working alone. And I strongly stand by that and agree with that as well, because perfect example, any high-risk motor vehicle stop, you need another officer. Any domestic, you cannot go alone. Certainly, any type of arrest when you have to transport a prisoner, now that vehicle isn't clear for call. So if you're transporting a prisoner and an accident comes on the other side of town, you can't go to that accident with the prisoner in your cruiser. Or if you have a prisoner in the station, they cannot be left alone. So you have to have a what's called prisoner watch. So an officer has to be in the station for obvious reasons with the prisoner. Now you're down a body, and we actually have to call an extra body in when we have anyone in custody. So it affects all that.
If I can just jump in.
Sure.
Excuse my ignorance here.
No, you're fine.
Sergeant as well. So how does that sergeant?
So the sergeant is considered one of our patrol bodies. They're not on, like in many police departments, a sergeant or a lieutenant or both wouldn't be considered part of the patrol force. They would be, you might have an agency that has a minimum staffing of, my prior agency might have 5 sectors. That would be our minimum staffing of 5. And we would also have a lieutenant and a sergeant working that wouldn't be considered part of that patrol force to answer calls. In Wenham and in many small town policing environments, the sergeants or any combination of 2 officers provides that coverage.
Okay, so patrol officer and the sergeant can meet the
be the 2
collective bargaining agreement of 2 officers.
Correct. As could 2 reserve officers for that matter. We're currently in a situation in place because of the manpower that we could have 2 reserve officers working alone, technically.
Chief, what is the number of officers you currently have, and what's the target? You said you're short 2, but.
So we're slotted for 12 full-time officers. We currently have 10. So we're currently in the process of a full-time hiring process right now. And candidly, it's really, really difficult across the board. I talked to every police chief on the planet, and the recruitment efforts that are currently in place are, I can't over exaggerate how difficult it is to find quality police candidates. So we're looking to get to the 2. Once we have the 2 additional full-time vacancies filled, that would then create a situation where our reserve officers are no longer scheduled per se, but they would still need to be available for sick days, vacation days, training, other situations where there's unplanned or unscheduled vacancies, we need them to operate. And then also, we need them because our collective bargaining agreement, I don't want to say mandates, but allows for certain days off that the full-time officers are entitled to. Then the reserve officers currently, as it's currently constituted, work those days.
Thank you. That helps. So just playing with some math. Well, I guess the question is, I tried to think of it from the opposite angle. I think I talked to you about this last year. Number of officers per 1,000 people metric. And but your point about you got to fill a certain number of slots to have 2 at a time, it doesn't really matter how many people you have. And that's kind of the Wenham problem all around, whether it's the schools or whatever else. If you got a building and you got to have students in there, you need a teacher,
needed to operate.
whether it's 10 kids in there or 30 kids in there, it doesn't matter. You still need a teacher.
Right.
So I wonder, thought exercise, like how much population could 12 officers serve? Right now we're a 3,900, around 3,900 population. Without Gordon College. With Gordon College, we're 5,200, but let's leave Gordon College out for a second. So like, I wonder, could you serve double that, 7,800 people with 12 officers? Because what would the math be if I did 12 officers divided by 7,800 people times 1,000? That's like 1.5 officers per person. So right now we're about 3 officers per 1,000. Sorry, that would be 1.5 per 1,000. What's the right number?
Well, it's less the population and it's more the coverage capabilities. Like, perfect example, granted, we're down 2 full-time officers now. We have 1 officer now. Compound that, we have 1 officer out on bereavement leave, and we have another officer that just tested positive for COVID today of our full-time patrol. So you can imagine how incredibly taxing that is on. It's insane to see the maneuvering that's put in place to find the coverage. And where it gets even more difficult is because if you have officers working shift work and they get off at 7 in the morning after working midnights, and then they're expected to be back in at 3 p.m., you have to fit the sleep in, and then they may be forced again, so they'll have to work another 16 hours. So it's very, very difficult. The magic number for a full-time only police department is probably 15 or 16, and then that would account for these time off situations that present themselves, and they would all be able to overlap and account for each other's absences and unforeseen vacancies, if you will. Right now, we don't have that. Even with the full-time 12 officers in place, we still can't function independently as a full-time only police department at that number. We're just not there. And if I was to, I'm sorry.
With 16 officers, you could serve a pretty big population. I mean, not 20,000 or 50,000 or whatever, but a lot bigger than 3,900. I guess I get your point. I staff clinics, and you got to have a certain number of people, whether 2 people walk in or 20 people walk in, you got to have a certain number of people for 6 days and everything else. It's just it's the staffing challenge no matter what. But if you put yourself in our shoes or put yourself in the citizens' shoes, like, we have to find a way to either drastically increase revenue or drastically cut costs, or it's really tough to be viable as a town.
100%.
On the police side, like, what's the solution to drastically cut costs? It's somehow to double our population. I don't know, like that to me. Anyway, what's your solution to the conundrum?
Well, I honestly, to get the last additional full-time officer, it was a little bit of a shell game where we moved some of that reserve money. So it wasn't in it, the town didn't assume that it didn't have to absorb all of those costs. We would still be in a situation to do some of that. So it's more of a movement. I think more so than the costs, and I say this with all due respect to any part-time officers that exist, that, and you've heard me say this before, and I'll die on this hill, that it's not effective, successful policing to do it in a manner that it's done. It is not safe. It is not proper policing, and I'll stand by that. In my hometown, I want an officer coming to my home during an emergency that dedicates his life and does it full time and hones his skills regularly. I do not want an officer that does it once a month that has another full-time job. And that's how I feel. That's how Kevin DiNapoli feels, and Chief DiNapoli feels that as well. And that is nothing against what these officers are doing, but I think full-time policing is more effective, safe, prudent policing. And I stand by that.
No doubt. Yeah, I don't know that anybody totally. I mean, my daughter got in a car wreck, and seeing the police officer there and him driving her to the local restaurant and sitting with her to wait for me, and the level of professionalism, and
it's a big impact.
Amazing. Yeah. So priceless, arguably, but we still got to solve the problem. I don't know.
I know.
What advice do you have for us?
Oh, it's tough. I mean, look at it. Obviously, had this not been a level funded, year, I certainly would have asked for an additional full-time officer. But the problem is that's not the only, we're dealing with other issues that are all money driven that would make my job and the deputy's job a heck of a lot easier. And I wish I had the magic wand to figure it all out. I really do. I wish I think the most feedback that I get from my officers is about training. And to, at some point, if and when at all possible, to provide more specific, narrowly defined training to the individual skills of the different officers that they're passionate about. Because I always say, when people are doing stuff that they're passionate about, they're more effective. And I think that would recruit more officers and better officers. What is also very difficult for a small town police chief is to keep people. And I know it's not just specific to the police department, but it also applies, I think, overall, has always been a quote Wenham problem of employee retention. And how do you dangle those carrots to keep people here? And coming from an agency where we had 20 different specialty units and divisions and different things that we could provide people, a small town police chief, I don't have that. I have small things that I can give, but I don't have a lot of things that I can give. And that's hard,
Chief, so I just want to, sort of think about this, and getting back to Dano's question about sort of like how many officers or whatever. And I was just doing some quick math. So, and you can correct me if I'm kind of off base on any of this stuff, but essentially, the way I've always viewed it, at least like in Essex, another small town, right? You've got 3 shifts a day that you need 2 people on, like beat officers, not you and the deputy, but you need 2 people, 2 officers out on the street. For each shift. 3 shifts a day, you need 48 hours of coverage a day at a bare minimum. 365 days a year, that means we need to fill at a bare minimum 17,520 hours of shift time. Not talking about holiday coverage, not talking about vacation, any of that other stuff. So if you take that and you kind of divide that down, you need basically 8.5 officers at a bare minimum to just cover the town. And that's in a complete vacuum. I mean, that doesn't account for having to cover for vacation and those type of things. So, I think, that's not, I know that's, certainly you would not say that's the absolute answer, but like, to sort of Dano's question, I think like that becomes sort of your bare minimum, as you need at least 8 working police officers, not administrative, just to cover the bare number of shifts. And then from there, and those are going to be split, obviously, like in that, there's a couple of patrol officers, there's a couple, sergeants in there or whatever.
Mhm.
Probably 4 to 6 patrol officers and, 2 or 3 sergeants or something like that. But that's sort of the bare minimum to think about. Like, I don't know that you can go any below that. And just because when you think of like having to respond to domestics or things like that, you need to have 2 officers to respond to certain things. So maybe it's helpful, maybe it's not, but I just thought maybe having a bare level, baseline might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's several different studies out there that some of them hone in on different formulas that they use. There's one, FBI does one, and then there's, I believe the International Association of Chiefs of Police does another. It's always changing. I can run those to see what the best and most recent kind of formula dictates for us, and shoot that off to you
Just
guys.
if I could just interrupt, Chief, the FBI study is 2.5 full-time officers per 1,000 residents. That's what they recommend.
And I think that's changed over the last couple of years. They're always tweaking it. 2.5 for 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is we can, with a properly staffed police department, the way you'd like it to be properly staffed, Chief, we could serve 6, 7, 8,000 people, and reasonably, give or take on the ratios.
Yep.
Problem is, we're just too small of a town with too few people. So
Right.
that's what we got to solve.
Isn't there such thing as regional policing? We have a regional school system. We do share other services. Does that exist?
It's very, very rare, and this has reared itself in the past. The problem that exists is just what I was talking about relative to the collective bargaining units that are in place, where it gets very, very difficult to maneuver around is the pay scales, the scheduling, the current unions, the seniority that exist over certain officers from one agency, that then if they were to merge with another agency, there's a lot that goes into that. And then what do you do, just with the rank structure? There's a lot. They've done, believe it or not, older studies. I have them in my office that the town has kind of kicked the tires on. And those are some of the bulletized cliff notes that come into play, but there's a lot more. We regionalized our dispatch, and that was when State 911 took it over, and that was a huge cost savings to the town because the state took it over. It's essentially free. Right. Whereas when we fell under Hamilton for their dispatching, we had to pay them.
I'm sorry, I was going to ask, in your travels, if you'd ever seen an example of one that has worked successfully.
I haven't. I don't believe the deputy. It's very, very rare for policing. You see the sheriffs do it for, in the county. You see a lot of county and obviously state, but I've never, in my 28 years full time, I've never been exposed to smaller police departments that have merged. I've never been exposed to it.
As Dano pointed out, we're trying our best to try to crack this nut.
I know.
Do you have those studies? I've heard about these studies before, Chief, on the planning committee, and people pretty much poo-poo the idea of any kind of regionalism in general, and then they reference, hey, we've talked about that and we've tried that, and it really doesn't save money, and all the things kind of that you just said, like it's really hard and it really doesn't save money. But that just doesn't pass the sniff test for me.
Right.
If you have real savings and real you know, that's really painful and it'd be really hard, no doubt.
Mhm.
The math, there would be real savings, whether that's why we have a regional library or why we have a regional school system. So I get there's tons of complexities that I don't understand, but at the same
Mhm.
time, just the math, it makes perfect sense to have the same number of officers cover more ground. And so more people. Anyway, all that to say, do you have any of that?
I do, yeah, I
You've done in
have
the
them
past?
from.
I haven't seen it.
There's a few in my office from I think 2 chiefs ago that are there. So they're probably quasi dated, but I think the kind of the broad overview of it, I don't think would change too much. So yeah, I definitely do. I can,
Maybe we could get a copy of that somehow, Jeff. I don't know, or anybody who's liaisoning with the chief, we could get a scan of that or something.
Yep, Finn and I have chatted, and I can absolutely,
Just to understand the rationale better, because I'm sure there's
So,
lots we can
so
understand.
Dano, I think that this is a really high strategic conversation, and I like it. But to Scott's kind of discussion, a couple weeks ago, like some of this is within the scope of what we're going to be able to do this, in the next month or two, and some of this is stuff I'd like to get the select board to give us a charter to do some of this more strategic, structural changes to the town or make recommendations that way. We're not going to. I think we need to collect the data. I'm interested. I'm curious. I want to see it as you do too, but it's not going to be something we can do as part of the budget. It's something I'd like us to do in the spring and summer.
100% with you. Yeah, I just want to think the more we talk about it, the more it maybe will create problems, or the more it'll raise red flags, or the more we'll get sidelined. But maybe it also just kind of keeps it up on people's mind as a topic worth considering. And so, but I'm with you that we're not going to move the needle on it anytime soon. So yeah, just
And
want to
certainly
keep
the more we
the
learn
dialogue.
as well. So, we don't learn if we're not asking good questions or questions.
yep, I can dig it up
And I know we need to get through this meeting too. So yeah, I'm happy to.
Yep. And I just wanted to point out, I think that Deputy Lucatoni is with us as well. I see a Wenham police badge here on the call. So just wanted to point out that we have another voice from the police department with us. So maybe moving on. I know Jeff, I think we might have solved the
The electricity.
Yeah, the mystery about why electricity isn't billing. And so what do? We raise our hand and let the
So
provider know?
what we
Is
hope
that the
is
way to
that
work?
when the chief or the deputy goes in and takes a look at that meter, that it is still frozen on the number that was there a while back, and that there's no recourse there, and they just start billing from here on out. But if the issue is more on the transmission side of the meter and not on the actual recording, we could have an issue where we owe some back electric bills, and then it becomes complicated because they would cross fiscal years and involve a prior year bill payment at town meeting and things like that. But we'll get more information on that moving forward. And just for the folks out there that might not know, so when we were looking at the budget reports I pulled together and sent out, one thing that struck us was that electricity in the police department seemed to have dropped precipitously a couple of years ago, and it appears that the meter stopped reading electric usage. So we were being billed $10 a month for the police station, and probably using more than $10 a month over there. So that is something we're looking into in the finance department, and with the help of the folks over in the police department, we will work with National Grid to sort of figure that out.
So for the committee, any other questions that you might put under the heading of operating budget, or shall we talk a little bit about the capital requests. Scott, Finn, Dano. Okay. Then maybe just kind of tackling the first one. I think maybe a little more information about the need for new pistols, new service revolvers, I should say, given that it was presented as an opportunity to save money, but it looks like, based on the numbers, the break even is about 15 years. And given that, just maybe a little more information about the why and the how the numbers make sense, and what is the useful life of the 9mm Glocks compared to the what is it, 40.4?
40 caliber. Yeah.
40 caliber. Yeah. And is that kind of a payback realistic in trying to make an argument about saving money?
So there's a couple schools of thought on this. Our firearms personnel at the department have done quite a bit of research on it. And the anticipated guesstimated savings, right out of the gates would be about $1,500 annually, with the trajectory of the increase in the ammunition costs. It would hover around $2,000 a year in savings pretty quick. But again, that's it's not a pinpoint exact number, but that's pretty close to it. I spoke with the owner of the company that we specializes in the firearms, the difference between the two weapons, and he went over the breakdown of that. And then I spoke with Sergeant Marsh, who's our firearms, one of our firearms trainers, who spoke to the ammunition costs. And that's based on what our average purchases are for training rounds that are required. The post-commission that I've touched on before has changed some of the shooting requirements. So they're going to require an additional, I believe it's one additional training session per year, times the 12, full-time and 8 part-time officers. So the 20 officers, if you will, have to now go one more time, which would be several hundred more rounds per officer for training that's required to maintain their certification. Beyond the those savings costs with the ammunition, the thought for the switch from the 40 caliber to the 9mm is the ease of use and what I mean by that, for the folks that aren't super skilled with the firearms, is the less recoil, and so there's less kickback, if you will, and it's a smoother release and delivery while on target for the officers. So in other words, it would be more accurate shooting, more efficient shooting, safer shooting for the officers. For smaller officers or who have less grip strength, that ease in shooting and less recoil is also important as well. It's a industry crossover now that it's pretty common with a lot of police departments that they're making this move as well. This isn't specific to Wenham, but a lot of changes from other police departments are going from the 40 cal to the 9s for those same reasons. So that's kind of the.
And what about the useful life? Do they break down over time? I mean,
the lights?
20 years, how long are these 9mm going to last? Are we going to
the life of the weapon, you mean?
Yeah. We're going to reach that break-even point that's between 10 and 15 years in the future.
Right. I can't. It's a quality weapon. The weapon that we're staying with the same brand, if you will. It's just a different caliber. So the life of the weapon, I'm not super concerned about. I don't know if Deputy Lucantoni can speak to that if he's still on. I think he is, but
Yeah, it's just, I mean, basically any weapon, it will care, maintenance. It will last, especially with Glock, where it has it's poly type plastic material. It's meant to go through snow, ice, mud. You can freeze it, run over it, put in the ocean, it'll still fire.
they drop it from airplanes to
Yeah,
show
it's
the
a
durability of
durable
it.
weapon. So to put really a life span on it, but like anything else, but parts start to go, springs start to go, the triggers start to wear. So those parts can be expensive and it can be time consuming to get those parts, especially in this day and age. So it's more towards these newer model Glocks would definitely last as long as we are taking care of them. But like as the chief mentioned, it's the recoil, which is a huge thing for, God forbid, there's ever a shooting. It's more of a accurate on these type of 9mm and the cost savings on the ammunition.
Okay.
Could you guys
Uh,
speak a little bit about what your policies for where the firearms are acquired and distributed to the police officers in the first place? I'm sure they're not coming with their own weapons, right? So you must be providing these over time to your police force, right?
Oh, yeah, they're not authorized to use any personal weapons on duty. And so all weapons are specifically issued from our armorers at the police department. They're each individually identifiable by way of serial numbers. So the serial numbers are specific to the individual weapon issued to the individual officer. So they're responsible for the cleaning and maintenance, which our armorers or our firearms experts who are in charge of the training would ensure at every training, at every qualification. They're checked for, as the deputy had mentioned, the wear and tear. They're checked to make sure they're cleaned appropriately. They're checked to make sure that each individual officer is handling them appropriately and they're in good working order. So yeah, those are individually issued.
So what would be the time frame if you had to go with to phase these in over time? Like,
So
what is your replacement? Like, do you have to replace like a tenth of the firearms you have on hand every year anyways? And so it'd be 10 years to rotate from one to the.
We usually do them all at this, well, not usually. I mean, it would be common practice to do them all at the same time, especially because of the ammunition would be different and it's cheaper to buy the ammunition in bulk. So if we phased it, and not to mention our policies and our qualifications and trainings and things of that nature, they would all need to be the same weapon of the same caliber. So we would never want to kind of tear through the changes. They would need to be all one. So what would happen is if the capital project was approved and the funding was put aside, once the order was placed after the July 1, they would all come at the same time, and then we would do the training, and literally within about a 1 week's period, every officer would have to be trained in the new weapons, how to clean them if it's any different there, and then they would have to certify with the new weapons, very stringent specific guidelines to make sure they're able to carry them.
So maybe to summarize, would you describe this as a need or a nice to have?
Based on all the information that I've received from the experts in the field, I would call it a need, because I think anything that's going to make our officers be better quality shooters, then it's a safer, more efficient way to go about moving in that direction. That's how I feel.
Just one detail question I didn't hear asked or answered maybe on that is the current weapons. When did you all take possession of those, or when were those integrated in? When did you buy those? Did somebody already answer that?
No, I believe, is it 8 years, Dep? Does that sound right? I think it's 8 years.
Yeah, honestly, Chief, I think it could be closer to 10 years.
Yeah.
But we can get that specifics, 8 to 10 years.
And there's resale for the unspent.
So the
ammunition as well. You're going to sell the guns, but
the quote that we received includes trading in these weapons. So
and the remaining
the existing, so I believe they gave $8,000 as part of the, I have it right in front of me. I can give you that. I believe it's about $8,000 trade-in for the existing weapons that we have.
looks like the budget material read 9,300.
Oh, you have it in front of you? Did you find it? Okay.
Yeah, 9,300. Thank you. Any other questions on the weapons request? Okay, next up, something I think I was asking about last year as well. You know, this idea that there's a 15-year-old tradition of moving out of vehicles every 3 years. In my mind, vehicles are becoming more reliable, and particularly if you moved from one brand to another for that very purpose, does that 3-year rotation still make sense? Also, in light of this, it's rather significant cost to equip and mark the vehicles, which is just sunk cost, doesn't transfer, doesn't have a trade-in value of 20 grand a year. Is there a possibility, has it been considered to stretch out that 3-year period to 4-year period? The savings alone in terms of getting more years for that 20 grand, could that cover the cost? Is that a way to save a little bit of money here? Or is it lost through repairs?
Yeah, and that's what had happened. Was they tried to stretch it out, if you will, which led them to making that change over to the existing schedule of the 1 every year and then every 3 years 2. And because of the maintenance costs. And the problem, in speaking with our inventory control specialist today about this, Mike Perry, who's a retired reserve officer that handles a lot of this, that the delay that still exists for some of these parts, because we're so small, that if we have 1 or 2 cruisers that are grounded because we're waiting on a part, it has a compounded effect on the day-to-day operations of the agency. If we have an officer at training or an officer at court, and then we have an officer who's doing a traffic detail for the safety of the roads, now if we have a cruiser down, it can really upset the apple cart big time. I'm
sorry, what is that inventory? You have how many marked and unmarked?
So right now we currently have 4 marked and 2 unmarked, and I have the mileage. It's rough mileage. Let's see right there. So depending on which car we're looking at, the highest mileage is the Honda CR-V, which has 130,000 miles on it. That's a 2017. That's the existing vehicle that is used by Deputy Chief Lucantoni, and it's used as a detective vehicle. So that mileage is pretty high compared to what we understand will be the compounding maintenance costs for that. Then the next vehicle that we were gonna trade-in, if approved, is the 2018 Ford Explorer. And then it's got just over 90,000 miles on it now. So it's been my experience now, even with the newer vehicles, that once, because these vehicles are driven 24 hours a day in many cases, once we hover around that 80 to 90,000 mile mark is when the maintenance costs creep up. And then it's compounded with the fact that the trade-in values go way down once. So for what we get in an extra year, or what we would maybe get in an extra year of waiting to stretch that out, it lessens by way of the trade-in value of the car that we would go to spend in. Excuse me, trade-in.
Okay. So fair to say that you are looking at this rotation carefully, not merely following something that was started 15 years ago and saying if it's worked for 14 years, it's good for 15 and into the future.
Correct. That is fair.
Yeah. Any follow-up thoughts from the committee on the request for a new unmarked and a new marked vehicle? Was that the extent of the capital request? I think so, for the police.
I think there was some that weren't recommended by the town administrator. There was a renovation of a bathroom. Trying to remember what there was. I think there was a second one as well. It was the cameras.
Yeah, that I could speak to both of them real quick. The women's bathroom renovation was going to mirror the existing men's bathroom renovation that was done this year. Based on the square footage in the women's bathroom, there's a lot of dead space in there. The thought process, because there was so much extra dead space, that we would like to incorporate that into maybe a little bigger project that would allow us to maybe transition some of that unused space into a storage area, because the department is lacking in that. So that was the thought of shelving that, or kind of kicking the can down the road with that one. And then, I'm sorry, Finn, what did the second one?
It's cameras. I think it was security camera.
So if the quotes that we've received in the past, if we incorporate the project with the town hall, which is also in need of an upgrade in that area, we can do it's much more cost beneficial to the town to create a bigger project of redoing the police and town hall camera system. That was the thought in speaking with Steve and Joe Pesamato, who's done some research on it as well, that that might be maybe a project that can be within a 5-year window.
These are not body cameras. These are cameras affixed to the building.
Surveillance, yep. Surveillance cameras for the interior and exterior of both buildings.
Just out of curiosity, are any local police forces using body cameras?
Yep, some are. And it's
Essex does.
Yep. Some do. It's again, it ties into a collective bargaining agreement. In order to secure some of the grant funding associated with it, you have to have a successful collective bargaining agreement in place that addresses the use of body cams. And then the costs, a lot of these grants will cover the costs of the cameras, which isn't necessarily always the biggest cost. It's the cloud storage and the data storage that is more expensive than the cameras themselves. So those two things associated with them, they're in our they're in our window and they're in our wheelhouse, and we're trying to navigate through that. And that's definitely within a couple year period. We'd like to do that.
Thank you. Interesting.
Sure.
So that is probably $100,000 to $200,000 investment. I've heard that number kicked around somewhere. So that would have to be in the 5-year plan that we talked about a little earlier, Jeff, right?
Yeah. You talking about just like the storage and things like that?
Yeah, it would be, an investment at the beginning and then an ongoing cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thought would be if we can make it work, and I'm sure there'll be challenges, is to wrap that into something through the Danvers solution, which wouldn't necessarily be building out a huge data center for them. I know they're working on that, but yeah, worst case scenario, if there's security challenges to it or something, you would have to build out, like one of those $200,000, kind of systems.
Okay.
There's a lot of vendors out there. The prices are, there's a bunch.
And hopefully federal money to help with the purchase.
If
Any
I could,
other questions? I'm sorry.
I was just going to weigh in on the body cameras. As far as the grant, as the chief mentioned, it would get you the camera. It's the storage, as the chief mentioned as well. But also not only the storage cost, but it would increase personnel to download and provide this type of footage for DAs, defense attorneys, where a lot of departments that have abundance of officers where they can delegate those duties, where we're a smaller department, we would have to really look into increasing that, because I'm the department prosecutor, but it would definitely increase as far as those requests coming in for footage, because it'll be for every citation stop to major event.
So as of now, there is no mandate, state or otherwise, for the police department to be equipped with this camera.
No,
this is community by community decision.
The good news is if that does come to fruition, with that, I think they can't expect that to be an unfunded mandate, because it would just be too much. It would be unrealistic to imagine that municipalities could assume or absorb those costs. But I think if it were to come, which I think it's not if, it's when, then so would funding come with that, which is a good thing. The bad thing is it becomes, certainly issues with the unions, because then it kind of takes away the collective bargaining end of it. So it gets a little muddier if that were to happen. But I think to your point, that it will happen. I think it will happen, especially with the post commission in place and what Massachusetts law enforcement, where it's headed.
Issue for a future date then. Any other questions from the committee for Chief or Deputy Chief this evening? Certainly appreciate your time, information.
Sure.
Excellent. Well, again,
Thank you very much.
Thank you both for joining us, and we know where you are if there are additional questions.
Sounds good.
Have a good night, gentlemen.
Good night.
Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, let me see if I can accelerate this a little bit. We do have a few more things we want to get through. Next up on the agenda is a discussion, follow-up from last week when Kim Butler joined us, just to take the temperature here of the committee. Any heartburn, I think is the terminology that was used last week. Any objections to the requests for increases where they exist within the library budget, or for that matter, the rec department, since it's all part of culture and recreation, or the capital request by the library to paint the building, which is 20 years plus aged, and repair any of the clapboard that is in need of repair. personally, I think the library is just a terrific resource for the community, and we get it at roughly a third of the cost of running it, given it's a regional library, as was pointed out earlier, and shared with Hamilton. And yeah, same for the rec program, which we've heard is very well attended and serves from toddler nearly to our seniors. I don't know if I want to get into it and look at the, reflect on the numbers again, or if the committee is generally in favor and has no follow-up questions or concerns about culture and recreation.
I don't
I'm
know.
just trying to pull the
Go ahead.
numbers. I'm just
Go
trying
ahead,
to pull
Dano.
the numbers back up again. It'd be nice to everybody look at the numbers if somebody could share them, but I'm just looking for them here in my files.
Yeah, do you want to see we're talking about the culture and rec numbers? Because I can pull those up.
Library and culture and rec. Yeah,
Yeah,
library, it's all the same.
Let me just see if it's. I think I actually just had the library itself, but let me see if I can pull this. Share screen for here.
While he's bringing that up, the building seems in really good condition otherwise, and I must have missed it in the past years, but they must have authorized something for the solar panels on it. But it seems like just like painting your house, you gotta paint the building to keep it in good condition so it doesn't rot out from under you, and you need a new building entirely.
It's kind of the way I'm viewing it, that it's just regular maintenance. You're going to own a building, you do need to maintain the exterior.
Now, are folks
Yeah,
seeing
when I-
this, but seeing this really small?
Yeah, I'm gonna
That's
put it
not
on my
bad.
other screen here.
Library, as with some of the other departments, also recently completed this, had a new contract signed, which, like all the others, reaches back a couple of years. We had been told before that the year one increase is a little heavier due to some step increases, and then also COLA is part of that, which would explain how you get from the 2% COLA increase to approximately 3.5% on wages overall. Yeah, Wenham's share of the library expense is a third. Hamilton covers 2/3.
So can you help me make sure I'm reading these percentages right on the screen? When I
Yeah.
see I'm looking at the second to last row, increase over prior year, 2.1. So that's basically contrasting the actual 2021 to 22. Then 2.22 is again, below our 2.5, right? And it's a pretty small increase of 2.2, right? So and then it says 5.94, right? So that's the 706 over the 655, right? Or sorry, no, that's the whole
No,
total.
this is a
isn't it?
1041 over the
Yeah.
983.
93.
Which
Yeah.
line are you guys on? Which row?
He's looking at the way bottom, the increase over prior year on the bottom.
My bad. Okay,
So-
got it.
The way these are set up is, so to the far right side is meant to be a comp of how is that particular line item comparing to what we actually spent in 23 what the budget was in 24, and then some sort of projection for 24. Down below is meant to show you each year what's the increase over the prior year, and then the final line is just sort of showing you what's the cumulative increase since, you know, FY21. So if we were to look at the final column, like what the proposed budget is for 25, you know, this is telling you the library is up 14.5% over that time frame. You know, just different ways of looking at it, but you know, you can kind of see, you know, that it's that adopted budget for 24, which is you know, probably driven by some of the contractual stuff. That's the big driver, because you're sort of, you know, clicking along at 2.2%. And then you have a big nearly 6% jump there in FY24. So that's that, but that's, yeah, like to Finn's point, it's the big jump is it's the 1,041 over the 983 jump there. And you can kind of see, actually, if you look in the adopted column for 24, the real driver there, you know, you're up 5.94. And the bigger driver appears to be, you know, probably the labor grew probably quicker. Actually, no, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that isn't true. Plus 6, 835 divided by. So that's almost 7.9% is the labor, and and 2% is the expenses in the FY22 budget year. And then it looks like it's sort of more normalized in the request for FY25. Maybe the labor growth isn't quite as bad.
And there's only, if you look at the request for 2025 for expenses, it's 347, right? And you look at that same row, you know, back in 2021, it's only $20,000 more over 1, 2, 3, 4 years of
Yeah,
running the business, right? Or running the library. It's labor that grows
yeah.
while the expenses stay more controlled.
Seems to be a consistent theme within the town that it's the labor. Yeah, it's labor. It's the benefits that is driving our increases year over year. Well,
Yeah, and it's probably more pronounced here, Jeff, because this is, you know, this is a particular department that, you know, the majority of the workforce unionized, you know, in the last year or two. So where most other departments, you're looking at 2 to 3% increases. It's the places where you've got, you know, collectively bargained agreements that you're seeing the much, you know, higher run rates. And Finn, to your point, like expenses only being up like 20,000 over like 4 years, and that's sort of in line with the mandate we tend to give, right? Which is, you know, level fund expenses to the best you can. You know, labor is going to rise more than likely, but try to level fund on the expense side, and it would, you know, appear the library is doing a fairly good job of that. Divided by 3, you know, they're up 6% over 4 years, so it's not flat, but it's not even 2% a year.
And then if we look at the other department that's part of culture and recreation.
Yeah, I
that
can
would
share
be
that. It's really
recreation.
one line because it's just a shared service that, unlike library, where all the detail is on our side.
Because, right, we're the lead on it. Yeah.
So let's see.
Joint rec is showing a 3% increase year over year.
Yeah, in terms of budget, you know, it's up 4.2% over actual FY23 expenditures. But I would say I'm not completely familiar with how this works, you know, over here yet, but where they're the lead on that budget. I don't know. I guess it would be up to us to say something to like Steve and have Steve approach Hamilton and say, we'd like to see the rec budget, trimmed down a little bit. But yeah, they're a 3% increase, largely driven by, an increase to the rec director, and some other labor, COLAs, is the real driving force there. And overall, that's if we're paying a third of that, you're looking at, our share, that's probably $36,000.
Yeah. And if I look at what they're providing for that roughly $110,000, it's programs for adults and seniors, for youth, for preschool. There are specialty events based on the seasons. There's summer programming for kids from the ages 4 to 15. There's the pool that people can belong to. It seems like they're providing quite a bit of product for what we're paying for it, in my opinion.
Jeff, you still have the library budget up there on your screen you're sharing? Was that, I don't know, intent?
Yeah, I didn't move the recreation over. I mean, it was one line item. I don't have it on a PDF. I can move the spreadsheet over.
No, it's fine. I was just saying, yeah, you can stop sharing.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Is there, Jeff, any revenues associated with the library or the recreational? For since there's a multi-purpose room there that I remember one point they had somebody doing taekwondo with kids over there, which I assume wasn't town funded, so they must be renting it out.
And is that, because I know like the buildings are sort of attached, right? Would that be something that was happening in the rec space or in the library space?
It's in the rec space on, it's kind of in the same building, but there's like a basketball court kind of.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually going to raise the point of, 110,000, Hamilton is probably collecting revenue, which I have to dig into more, like if, how that offsets the actual cost of the program, but clearly they're raising revenue. But that's a question I have after looking at this is, what's, how does that help impact the cost of the program overall? I mean, I would think, because looking at this again, I'm looking at the joint rec and I'm thinking, actually, this is sort of the reverse. I'm thinking the 110 is our share. I'm assuming the budget is actually like $400,000 or something. I don't know. I have to look at this more, but it must be offset by something. The question would be, the question I have is, does that roll into general Hamilton coffers that then becomes part of their free cash, or is it more of like a revolving fund or a special revenue fund where everything operates in the fund and they're supplementing the budget with that? So I think that's a deeper question I want to look at.
That'd be good. I'd like to think that the $107,710 is net of the revenue. And the one page that was in the budget material that was distributed a month or so ago, does have info here on the program and membership revenues. For fiscal year 23, that totaled $619,000, roughly. And for fiscal year 25, it is targeted at $650,000.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to pull up that slide now.
It's kind of reminds me of.
I don't see how Wenham can Hamilton can pocket that. If we're sharing the expense, we must be sharing equally in the revenue as well. I mean,
yeah, you would think, like I say, I would have
Well, I
asked
know
that.
too, for a lot of those programs, it's a lot of seasonal workers and things like that, like for the camps and the individual programs. I don't know what the actual costs are, but in the budget, there's the full-time employees who run the recreational services, but a significant portion is going to be a variable cost. The camp is enormous, for example. I don't know how many people they hire, but it's a ton.
This reminds me of something we heard from the fire chief about how there is revenue associated with some of these cost departments that we're reviewing that isn't somehow visible, right? That he doesn't feel is visible. And all the revenue from the ambulance, for instance, he speaks about pretty regularly. And it's the same way with this, is we're only seeing the costs and not seeing, what revenues there might be associated with these departments.
Yeah, I'd say for this department in particular, it is the least amount of transparency of anything else that we look at, because we're just being given a single line that says, this is your share. So the ask was $107,710. Targeted revenue, 650,000. So yeah, that sounds like a great follow-up, Jeff, just to understand
Yeah.
that 107,710 is net 1/3 the 650.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it would seem it, but yeah, I want to just get more clear. I'd like, just from an accounting standpoint, I'd love to understand better, like the type of funds, the revenue comes in and things like that. But yeah, you would have to think it's reduced by any revenue stream, which is clearly pretty significant.
Before we move off culture and recreation, any other than that follow-up that Jeff will make, just to understand a little bit better about the joint recreation budget, specific questions or concerns about the library spending on an operating or capital budget basis?
One thing I don't know if this really matters to the budget, but I do know that when the solar panels were installed several years ago, there was at least supposed to be an agreement in place that the energy generated from them would be purchased at the town, purchased by the town for a discounted rate for a given period of time. Pretty normal contract. I just haven't heard anything about how that process is going, if we're benefiting from it, if the panels are generating as much power as we thought, where that's going. And I would have thought after a few years, it somehow would have shown up in our budget as some sort of offset, or at least shown up as like, we would have been paying this much for electricity from National Grid, but we're drawing this much from the solar panels. I'm not sure that falls within Kim's purview, but I also don't know who we ask about it.
So we actually have, there's a woman who's like our energy consultant. I think she was actually heavily involved in, and I think she's the energy consultant for both Hamilton and Wenham. And I think she was pretty heavily involved in the project to get the solar panels in there. So I can talk to Steve to see if either he has the kind of info you're looking for, or I'm assuming if he doesn't have it directly, like this woman can provide it. Because yes, it's like you say, I mean, you've made the investment to the solar panels, that you'd like to see that it's actually producing the kind of revenue or expense offset that was promised.
Yeah, I just think, like, I was thinking about it the other week, is like some of those things we could at least present to the town. I mean, we spent a lot of money on solar panels. It'd be good to say, like, well, because we spent this money, we spent X amount less on electricity overall, and project that out. Just I don't know. It feels like we installed it, and I know there actually is a website on the library page where you can see how much energy generally is being generated, but I just haven't heard anything at all about it since the installation was done.
Yeah. And Scott, is it your understanding we sort of paid for that like full price? It wasn't one of these like lease deals where it's like, you get a small savings and the leasing company really is the one that reaps the benefits.
My understanding was that we paid for it in return for discounted energy for like, a 25-year period, but definitely don't quote me on that, even though it's now recorded. but
It's my experience with other municipalities that most municipalities don't want to put up the money and they go for the leasing option because it just means it's like the return on investment is infinite because you don't put any money up and you get a reduced electrical bill as opposed to putting in hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to buy it yourself, depending on how big a farm it is. So I would be surprised to hear that we bought it, just because it seems to buck the trend.
Yeah,
Right.
that may make sense. I was more just my recollection was more about the period of time we got the energy, unless I wasn't part of the decision to actually do the panels itself. That predates my term.
Yeah, well, let me follow up on that, and I can get you guys an answer from Steve, as sort of what the history on that is, and sort of how we've how we've participated in some sort of savings on that one way or the other. Is this maybe 3-4 years old? How long ago did they do this?
That sounds about right. I think they came online officially 2 years ago. So
My
when we think
horizon is
about
before COVID and after COVID, and this was
Yeah.
right in that COVID time.
yes,
Okay. All right. Well, I will, that's on my, I've got a couple things on my to-do list here, and that's one of them to follow up with you guys on.
That's a good question, because I do recall last year discussion about the solar panels on the library possibly being a model for other town buildings as we try to move away from fossil
exactly.
fuels.
So that Jeff, that's exactly where my mind was going for later discussions. That if it actually turns out that it's a net benefit, we've got a lot of potential other places we could do similar
Sure.
things.
Yeah,
Offset
and
the huge bill we're going to get from the police department when that gets rectified, right? So,
if we have to get billed for electricity going back to 2022. Okay, I guess moving on, I did send out some material for review. First minutes from our joint meeting with, and I don't know if this is something you could pull up as well.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. Let me just,
What we're looking at, hopefully you had a chance to look at. I think I sent it maybe yesterday morning. It's the minutes from the December 16th joint meeting with the select board. That would have been the day that the town's departments and committees joined us to present their departments FY25 requests, operating budget requests.
which doc did you, I've got 3 docs. Which one
Yeah,
did you want
so
to pull
the
up first,
December
Jeff?
16 minutes first. So we're just
Okay.
looking to either approve or offer edits to those minutes from December 16th.
December 16th?
For some reason, I didn't receive these minutes. Jeff.
I've got one from January 3rd.
Yep, same email.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
When was that sent?
That was late yesterday morning, I believe.
It was Monday at 5:30, 5:40.
Oh, okay. Day before.
Oh, I found it. Never mind. Sorry.
Oh, it's hidden. I had to click the other button.
Yeah.
Well, unless we have speed readers in the group, maybe it's premature if folks haven't had a chance to look at them to ask they be approved. Although now there is an item I was going to bring up on matters not anticipated by the chair because the date kind of crept up on me. But we owe to Michelle McGovern a response on a page that would appear in the annual town report. So she has reached out to every department committee in town to provide a synopsis of what is their mission, the nature of their work, what were their accomplishments in 2000. Oh, you can see here in 2003, personnel changes, commentary, updated department or committee membership, and then goals for 2024. This is actually due tomorrow. It's kind of short, so I'd ask that everyone read it now, as long as it's visible on the screen, or if you have it in your email box and can take a look at it. If you would offer any edits, or if somebody would like to make a motion to accept as written.
Yeah.
I will.
Can I say that maybe something might be useful in the, I'm looking at the significant statistics in the middle there.
Yeah.
The only thing I can think that might be easily countable would be the number of times it met. But obviously, you know, if this is due tomorrow and it's not required, let's not bother. But might be a significant statistic worth mentioning.
Yeah, and I
Subcommittee.
haven't gone through this process yet, but I mean, it could be that, I mean, I don't know if is that how it was in there last year, Jeff, with the NA for the statistics, or, because I'm wondering if it could just be kind of removed. I mean, unlike, you know, like the treasurer's office or something where it's, you know, they processed X number of tax bills and what, you know, like the FinCom doesn't necessarily have like significant statistics. So it may be more appropriate to even pull it out. But, you know,
I think this is a new request. I don't think this.
Yeah, I don't recall ever seeing this before.
I don't think this was captured a year ago in the annual town report. I looked. I was going to, my thought was, all right, let me look at what was done a year ago and update it, but I didn't see anything. So, yeah, this may be an outgrowth of the suggestions that you know, Steve and Jeff and this committee, frankly, have made about trying to capture some data points, highlights of what various departments are doing. So it's a new request. And not everything is necessarily applicable to all committees or departments. So
Yeah.
I'll stop chattering and let you all take a read on it.
I move that we delete the statistics reference and adopt it as is without that.
I would second that.
If you're looking for a vote, Jeff Calder, I'll vote yes on that.
Very good. I do as well.
All right.
So I'm gonna have to stand behind it.
Yeah.
So thank you, gentlemen. I think I'll just forward that over to Michelle as you see it with that correction that was suggested by Dano. Thank you.
Perfect.
And I think we'll hold on the minutes, give you all a chance to look at them, combine them with any others that come up. I'll do my best to. Well, you have these, so but you know, do my best in the future to try to get them out sooner so everybody can take a look at them, so that you can opine on them. And just open it up. It is 8:34. Open it up to the committee if there's any other comments, issues to raise before we conclude. Hearing none. would someone like to make a motion to adjourn?
I'll
Mr.
make a
Stan-
motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry. I'll make a motion to adjourn at 8:34.
Second,
Aye.
Finn is seconding that motion. All in favor? Jeff Calder, yes.
Scott Schoenberger, yes.
Piano, yes.
Excellent.